was a terrific short speech by the congressman. Thanks for making those remarks, and thanks for reminding us that this competition is about our values. It's about a lot of our traditions. It's about a very different kind of system, a totalitarian system. I used to refer to China's system as authoritarian, but it really goes beyond that now. I think that once you've immersed yourself, as the congressman clearly has, in all that China is trying to achieve and the means by which it's trying to achieve it, the Communist Party's aims, you realize that this is actually about a competition between very different systems. And I think it's very hard to find a word other than totalitarianism to describe what the Chinese Communist Party is about today in particular. We've now seen, with the rise of China's leader Xi Jinping, and more recently, just last month, with the Communist Party's reassessment of its own history. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party is 100 years old, and Xi Jinping has just undertaken what is only the third official reassessment of their history, formal reassessment of their history. And what he's done in that revision of their history has been to close the door on the era of reform and opening that we grew up in. The idea that Deng Xiaoping, when he came to power at the end of the 1970s, following the cataclysms of Mao Zedong's cult of personality rule, the Great Leap Forward and the attendant famine, the largest famine in human history, the decade-long Cultural Revolution, Deng Xiaoping emerged and allowed the unleashing of market forces, at least to the extent that China was able to go from a total backwater with less than $1 a day in per capita GDP terms to becoming the world's second largest economy. What Xi Jinping remarkably has done now has been to shut the door on that era and to make very clear that the reform and opening era of Deng Xiaoping is over. And the vision that he is now pursuing and that the party under him is pursuing is one that in many ways goes back to the period before Deng Xiaoping and reform and opening. It is a period that he calls common prosperity, which has a nice sound to it until you start to really look under the hood at what it really means in its implementation. It is one that begins to close the door on market forces and to put the powers of the party to inject those powers into all aspects of regular life in China, the economic life, the political life, now increasingly the cultural life as well, and to make sure that what the party is really pursuing is the demand for loyalty to Xi Jinping personally. So we're going back to something more reminiscent of the cult of personality politics of Mao Zedong. The competition for us really boils down to what the congressman alluded to, which is having the courage of our own convictions and holding fast to our values and realizing that our values are actually one of the most potent instruments that we have in our competition with China, particularly given that China's view, what it really stands for is its own power, and beyond that, it's a rather hollow vision. But it also comes down to three areas that I just want to touch on briefly. That is the competition for capital flows, technology, and data. And I think that as we, in countries that enjoy the rule of law, countries that aspire or enjoy to have or enjoy democracy, these are the areas that we really need to focus on. So what we have in the way of technology is a competition for semiconductors. It's critical the West invests heavily into our own ability to conduct not only R&D, but the actual manufacturing of semiconductors. All of the other technologies of this era rest on the pillar of semiconductors. Second is the capital flows. Now, Beijing, as you've seen, is beginning to actually decouple its companies from U.S. capital markets. It doesn't want to be regulated anymore by U.S. companies, by U.S. regulators or the U.S. stock markets, but it wants to continue to tap the flow of American capital, and most of that capital is flowing in passively through the indices. I think it's beyond time for the Securities and Exchange Commission and members of Congress to begin investigating the major index providers, MSCI, many others that have weighted Chinese companies heavily so that American capital now passively flows into Chinese companies, including companies that are committing human rights atrocities, including companies that are at the forefront of China's military and industrial complex, and including many companies that are actually sanctioned by the U.S. government. So we sanction Chinese companies, we forbid exports to certain Chinese companies, but we don't forbid Americans from investing. And that's what's happening with American pension funds. It's what's happening with endowments that are investing American savings into these Chinese companies, unbeknownst to those American savers themselves. And finally, is in the area of data. Beijing is seeking to become the world's greatest data broker. We are playing into that by not coming up with a holistic strategy that would allow free market, rule of law democracies to share data with one another in order to promote innovation. But we should be walling off that data from China. China is very easily accessing our most intimate data, whether it's our DNA records or our online habits or the supply chain flows of our companies. So those are really the three areas those are the three fronts that we need to be fighting on: data, capital flows, and technology flows. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Pottinger, for that very helpful and concise overview of China in the last 20, 30 years. Let's go to our next speaker. You're welcome to come up to the podium, or you can stay in your seat. Okay, very good.
I would like to be